Brexit is an important issue, and with an election coming up in about 6 weeks' time, it seems like Brexit might be the focus of that too. Most of the parties have made their policies on Brexit very clear. If the Conservatives get a majority, they'll proceed with Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, which was negotiated in October. If the Brexit Party get a majority, then they pursue a no-deal exit. If the Lib Dems secure power, they cancel Brexit altogether, calling the whole thing off. One party that struggled to nail their colours to the mast is the Labour Party. Labour have repeatedly been accused of not having a clear enough stance on Brexit. It's looked obvious that even within the party, there's been a great deal of conflict over what kind of Brexit they should pursue. So in this video, we're going to discuss what kind of Brexit a government under Jeremy Corbyn would be aiming for. And to do that, we'll be looking at the speech that Corbyn made in Essex earlier this week. Before we get to that though, we want some help from you, especially if you live in Scotland. We currently have an opinionated survey live on our website, asking you your views on Scottish independence. We'll be using the results in an upcoming video, so your views will be super important. Anyone who completes the survey will be eligible for an exclusive discount on our pin badge store once the third season of badges lands. You can check out the survey by clicking the link down below.
It's so invigorating being here out of London on the campaign trail. You don't know how good it feels for us that have been stuck in those debates for the last 3.5 years. So out here is like fresh air pumping through us. It's fantastic. So to Brexit. Story of my life. If Boris Johnson wins this election, our country will take a decisive lurch to the right. His Brexit deal is a hard right deal. It paves the way for workplace rights, environmental protections and consumer standards to be stripped away. It will weaken the union. The Prime Minister won't admit it, but he's putting a border in the Irish Sea. And it will make every region and every nation poorer. After 3.5 years of Tory failure, there's only one way to solve this. This has to go back to the people.
A Labour government will get Brexit sorted within 6 months by giving you, the British people, the final say. And despite what some commentators want you to believe, Labour's plan for Brexit is clear and simple. It's time to take a decision out of the hands of politicians and trust the people to decide. It won't be a rerun of 2016. This time, the choice will be between leaving with a sensible deal or remaining in the EU. That is the policy. It really isn't very complicated.
One of the most interesting elements of Corbyn's speech was the Brexit timetable. In the speech, he laid out how Labour would operate in order to solve the Brexit issue. It's worth remembering that like pretty much all manifesto and campaign promises, they're working on the assumption that they get into number 10 with a majority. If Labour were to hold a coalition or a minority government with other parties, these plans likely wouldn't be followed. At least, not exactly. That being said, Corbyn did lay out a clear plan, and it was semi-familiar. Labour, like Johnson, put a lot of focus on getting Brexit done. Unlike Johnson, Corbyn's willing to spend a bit more time to get to that stage. Under Labour's timeline, they want to, in quotation marks, get Brexit done within 6 months. This timetable is clearly a lot longer than the one proposed by Johnson, who wants us out by January. But when you look at what Corbyn intends to do in that time, you might begin to wonder if it's actually long enough. The shortest possible summary is that he wants to 1. Negotiate a completely new deal with the EU that fits with Labour's objectives, and then 2. Put that new deal to a referendum and allow the country to vote in order to test if the country actually supports the deal or would prefer another option. As I said, Corbyn claims that this can be done within about 6 months, which some are more than slightly sceptical about. To try and respond to their critics, Labour have proposed a so-called twin-track approach to make the whole process a lot faster. They say that they're going to try and legislate for a referendum while negotiating a new deal, essentially saying that the first part of next year will be taken up with both getting the deal and planning the referendum, rather than doing one and then the other. While some have said that the timescale of this plan is unrealistic, it's not completely impossible, depending on what they mean by getting Brexit done. Getting Brexit done is clearly a pretty politicised term, but it actually has kind of 3 phases: securing the withdrawal agreement, then the divorce settlement, and then a deal on the future relationship. Even when Johnson talks about getting Brexit done before October 31st, he never really meant finishing the whole thing. as they would have always needed a transition period in order to sort out the future relationship. So if Labour only mean that they'll get the first section of Brexit done within 6 months, then the whole thing looks a lot more likely. Labour did actually like quite a lot of what was in the existing withdrawal agreements, especially May's, so it could be reasonably quick if they just use that as a starting point. Also, remember that Johnson's deal was negotiated in only about 5 days of intense discussions. So let's say that it's possible to get a new deal sorted, and that it's put to the country. This would be interesting for a whole number of reasons, not least how Labour themselves will campaign during the referendum. Up until now, Corbyn has refused to say if he'd support the Remain or the Labour deal in this second referendum, with the party saying that they'll decide once the deal is reached. Either way, it's an interesting thought that Labour could negotiate a deal to keep Brexit voters happy and then campaign against it in the referendum. If the electorate did vote to abandon Brexit, then that stops the whole Brexit issue for Labour. However, if they vote for the deal, then Labour would still need to sort out the future relationship I mentioned earlier, which could take some time. Labour's ideal future relationship is really quite different from the Conservatives. Labour wants to see a much closer relationship between the UK and EU post-Brexit, staying within the EU's customs union and seeking a close single market approach, something similar to Norway's relationship with the EU. This might be a popular approach with Remain voters, but that doesn't mean that it'll be palatable for Brexiteers, with Farage already branding Johnson's more radical plan not truly Brexit. It would also come against the time issue, as it would still need to be negotiated with the EU. They might be hoping that these negotiations will be made easier by the fact that they're proposing staying close to the EU. This is because many believe that the EU would like to keep the UK as a close partner, so they might be more willing to negotiate if these negotiations help to keep the UK close. Even still, if the EU's negotiations with third parties show us anything, it's that getting deals like this aren't quick or easy, requiring huge amounts of negotiation. All of this is working under the assumption that the EU will grant another extension. The current deadline would give Parliament about 20 working weeks to get this resolved, significantly less time than Corbyn's hoping for. A lot of people in the UK are assuming that the EU will allow this extension, but that's not exactly guaranteed. If you want us to cover that in another video, then let us know by dropping a like on this video and commenting down below.
The first thing we will do in government is rip up Boris Johnson's deal and put it in the bin.
In the US, as Keir pointed out, workers get just 10 days holiday a year. Big business gets free rein to call the shots. And tens of millions of working class Americans are denied any health care at all. What Boris Johnson's Conservatives want is to hijack Brexit to unleash Thatcherism on steroids on our society. The Thatcher government's attack on the working people of our country left scars that have never healed. So I make no apologies at all, for Labour's role in stopping the disaster of no deal and resisting Johnson's sellout deal. I make news for delaying things in order to make sure that no deal was taken off the table before we hit the streets in our election campaign. So, if you want to leave the EU without trashing our economy or selling out of our NHS, you'll be able to vote for it. If you want to remain in the EU, you'll be able to vote for that. Either way, only a Labour government will put the final decision in your hands.
Regardless of the exact timetable or extension lengths, it's ultimately unsurprising that Labour wants a Brexit deal done with. Corbyn has a pretty, let's say, ambitious domestic policy agenda. Regardless of your views on his policies, there's a lot he wants to do in the UK, and there's little doubt this is where he wants the focus of his government to be. It's likely that as the election plays out, you'll see Corbyn trying to focus on domestic policies rather than Brexit. Ultimately, Labour seems to believe that it's their domestic policy agenda which will win over the nation. So, although they always needed to take time to clear up their Brexit position, it's very likely that you'll see Corbyn shift back to other issues before long. Speaking of other issues, just a reminder, we'd really appreciate you filling out our opinionated survey on Scottish independence. If you're from Scotland, we obviously want to hear what you think about the future of your country. If you're from the rest of the UK, it'll be great to hear how you feel about the potential collapse of the Union, and if you want your country to become independent too. If you're from Europe or anywhere else in the world, it would also be interesting to hear your perspective on this too. As I mentioned up front, we'll be thanking those who complete the survey with a special discount code when our new set of badges release. So be sure to check out the survey by clicking the link in the description. Subscribe to the channel for more updates as both Brexit and the election develop. You can also hit the bell icon if you want to be notified every time we release a video. And if you want more from us, you can find TLDR across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And if you want your name featured at the end of the videos, just like these people, then you can sign up to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.